What's the smirk for?
Now television diva. Television diva got all new threads on.
It looks good.
We're about to talk about someone who's high maintenance, so we bring in
someone who's high maintenance.
I am.
When I think Coach Mangini, I think high maintenance. There's a lot of talk about Antonio Brown's future after the way the Steelers season ended, you know, with him not playing in their last game because he walked out of practice their last week. Seems unlikely he will be back with the Steelers. Jerry Rice says AB wants to be with the 49ers. And now Bruce Arians, Tampa's new head coach, says he sees, quote, too much diva in the star wide receiver. A lot of takes here, Coach. What do you think the challenges that present itself in bringing a guy like AB into a locker room?
Well, the challenge is, first for the Steelers, is letting him go. When you've got a guy that is as talented as he is, the idea of giving him to another team or trading him to another team, it makes you sick. And you want to be able to figure out a way to make it work with the group that you have. And he makes Ben Roethlisberger better. He is an elite player, and he's created a lot of issues there. But it's really hard from a head coaching perspective or from a GM or ownership perspective to get past or to get your head around the idea of letting him go or moving on from him. Now, that being said, it's a little bit like a disruptive kid in the classroom where, from a coaching perspective, you have to spend so much time with that student that you neglect a lot of other guys, and you don't get to put the time into the plan that you would want to with other people. And at what point does that become greater than the value he has on the field?
So let's, if we can, almost disregard the first piece of it. Let's just say in a hypothetical, because you always say, I forgot who told you, that if you want to be a head coach, if you want to pick the players, become a GM, if you want to pick the GM, own a team, I'm misquoting it, but around there?
In the range.
Okay, so let's just, Art Rooney II has come out and said, it looks like he might not be on the team. If the owner says move him, doesn't matter how squeamish Kevin Colbert or Mike Tomlin are about it, they got to listen to their owner. If you are, what type of environment, what type of team do you think would be best suited to take on Antonio Brown, the good and the bad?
Well, it depends on Antonio Brown's approach when he gets to that team. Like New England has historically taken on guys that have been challenging in other environments. And because the locker room is mature, because the majority of the guys are pushing in the same direction, because there's always a chance to win the Super Bowl, a lot of time those guys will come back in line, or they'll fit in with the group because they're looking down the line towards a chance to win a Super Bowl. You see what happens or we've seen what happened in LA with the Rams, where they brought in a lot of guys that would be considered challenging. They're fine. It's fine when you're winning. Those guys become a real issue if you hit a rough patch. That's when it all implodes.
Yeah, Deshaun Jackson, Tampa Bay. Now, he doesn't want to be there. When you talk about wide receivers like that, Coach makes a good point. The winning is very, very important, and their overall productivity. Because wide receiver, they're about a couple things. Number one, they're about their numbers. Number two, they're about their money. I like the fact that you brought up New England from a culture standpoint, because I believe that New England, they made a trade for Josh Gordon. Didn't they? Didn't they trade a fourth or fifth rounder for him?
Fifth rounder.
Right? Yeah. Okay, so Antonio, given the number he has, he is the type of player that New England is a perfect trade for them. Because I don't think he's going to get a 1. But he has a cap number for the next 3 years, because as long as Tom Brady is there, they're going to be in a win right now mentality. So I think New England is one of the viable landing spots for him. And I believe it's probably one of the better spots, because the expectations of him when he comes into the building will be totally different if he goes somewhere. Kyle Shanahan, I got a lot of respect for how he coaches, but he doesn't command the respect on day number 1 that Bill Belichick and players in the transition. I don't know what's in the paperwork. I don't know what it is, but somehow, no matter what city they're coming from, on their way to New England, they make a transformation. So Antonio's going to have to decide, how long do I want to be able to play this game? And he's going to have to adjust his attitude, because I'm terrified if I'm a coach bringing him in, not because of productivity. I'm terrified of what the younger players are going to see. And the younger players, if they see the behavior of an older guy who is paid and one of the league leaders and best at his position, you can believe ultimately that kid, when he gets a position in the classroom like AB has, he's going to act like AB does. So when you look at your roster, you're wondering what type of effect that receiver is going to have on your roster. So I would be careful in the places that I'm going to bring him. I also believe that Denver's a viable spot because
guys there.
Because Emmanuel Sanders is there, and I know the head coach is not having it. He's an old school coach, defensive coach,
big fan,
one that you like, and he's not going to have it. So I'm going to put him in a situation that it puts pressure on him to continue to change compared to accepting the behavior that we've seen in Pittsburgh.
And Chris makes a great point. It's not. It's the lessons that they teach the younger players. So if you're in a win right now mentality and you feel like you're close and you've got a mature locker room and you can incorporate a guy like that, can be a huge asset. If you've got a young locker room and you're trying to create a culture, you're trying to set things up for the long term, and you have a guy that comes in and sets a poor example that you've paid, that you've validated, you're saying organizationally, it's okay to act like this.
That's why a team that has a need that might be a fit theoretically, I don't think will be in the market for him, and that's the Jets. Because the Jets are exactly what you're talking about. They are a couple years from winning. They are trying to build a new culture around a new head coach, around their young quarterback. They do have a need at wide receiver, obviously. I know Robbie Anderson's there, but aside from him, they don't really have a true #1 receiver. But you would be, a team like that, you'd be worried about. Bring in Antonio Brown and what the trickle-down effect as far as on the other players. And my concern with AB is very simple. I can deal with diva. I can deal with volatile. I cannot deal with unreliable. And that's why I never would have, in 1,000 years, I never thought I would be advocating for trading a player of Antonio Brown's caliber when you're as good as the Steelers, until he walked out on the team. Like, you can throw as many coolers as you want, yell at the quarterback, spike the ball in practice. I know you don't like it, but I can deal with it.
No, because they all lead to something. That's why Coach doesn't like it. Like, because they all lead to something. It's like the little kid. Man, you think they don't wake up throwing spitballs. No, they graduate to that. And then the next thing you know, they're doing other things, disrupting the class. That's why Coach said, typically, if a diva wide receiver, they start off somewhere. They don't come into the league that way, all right? They start off somewhere, and it starts a lot like that. I disagree with you as far as the Jets, because if I am the Jets, and I'm trying to not be the stepbrother here in New York, I'm trying not to be the stepbrother to New England and what they do in the AFC East. I bring in a player like him because I know the head coach and the young quarterback, it's going to make both of them instantly better. I like his cap number, and it's going to bring you more optics on your team. It gets you off of Broadway and to potentially put you on Broadway. So I think the Jets are a viable spot because he needs big productivity. You know, and if I told you that's one of the reasons I'll be able to solve his problem, because I'll get him the football. And if you get him the football, you're going to have less problems.
What does it say about a guy like Bruce Arians, who knows Antonio Brown very well, knows his work ethic, knows his productivity, doesn't want him and needs him, would be willing to pass on a guy with that talent?
Did he say he'd be willing to pass? He just said there was too much diva.
The assumption is...
I actually see that as a more viable place than New York, because there is a relationship. And if you can bring him in and say, hey, I know you, AB. We were together for a long time. I know what your potential is. This is what my expectations are here in Tampa. And you get that understanding as a head coach. The thing with Adam Gase is he had some guys that were considered divas down in Miami.
Yes.
And then he shipped them all out. So it's hard for me to think that he might be willing to bring them in. But in Tampa, if you've got a pre-existing relationship and you knew a guy before he came up, before he really made it, sometimes you can have that connection of, I'm going to help you achieve your goals. You help me achieve mine.
And I think Bruce said that in the follow-up. He said he's a different guy now than the guy that we drafted in Pittsburgh. And you're right about that intel. Typically, if I knew you, and if I knew you before the stardom hit, you have an avenue to be able to get in there for them to have an ear to be able to hear you.
Yeah, and they'll be open sometimes to the coaching, because You've given them that coaching before when they were a young guy. You've had that honesty that sometimes it's hard to have with someone you don't know, and now you're a star.
What is it with your positions? Why do you guys have to be so diva and jerky all the time? Just, you know, come out there, do your
diva
thing.
and jerky
Not
all the
you,
time.
of course. Maybe there was a cup of coffee
Took
where
a
you were,
hard
but not
turn.
anymore.
Wow.
Okay. When you watch the games this weekend, watch how many times they send 10 guys out there. Watch how many times. Watch how many times. I seen the show without me on it. Okay. Hey, be careful what you ask for.
Coach, stick
all right,
around.
I might,
Gotta take a break.
I'll leave with Coach Mangini.
Coming up.
Then what will you have?
Is the Rams offense?
Oh, all of a sudden that diva stuff ain't
We're
so
back after
bad.
this.
You want a good show? You better get you a diva. Refined though. I'm 50 in a diva.
And reliable.